All right, this story involves my parents, and so I've titled this, Oh, Just One More Thing, in honor of my dad, whose favorite television show was Columbo. And as a result, I've seen many of these episodes, and the punchline in every episode is Lieutenant Columbo at the end turning towards the suspect and saying, "Oh, just one more thing," as he's about to leave. And of course, this is the last question he asks whoever the suspect is that cracks the case, and they are found out. But in the context of my YouTube channel, which I intended to shut down for a while, it also fits in that sense of, oh, just one more thing before I go. Not to say that this will crack any sort of case. No, nothing along those lines. But an interesting thing happened to me the other day, and I would like to share it. So, let's begin story time. I was about to start my car. I was in a parking lot. I had just done something, and I sit in my seat in the car, put the key in the ignition, turn it, and it doesn't turn over. And you just have that sinking feeling like, oh no, not this again. Because I've had things like this happen many times, and I'm turning it over, and the engine will not start. So I'm thinking, okay, well, my power's on. I can still work some things. This is probably my battery. But I've also, in the past, been driving on the middle of a busy road and had my alternator die on me. And the power steering starts to go and everything just stops working, and you're totally screwed if you don't get off the road immediately. Like if that ever starts happening, your power steering starts to go, just pull over and get off the road immediately because you know something bad is about to happen. So anyway, I'm thinking, oh man, maybe my alternator is out, so I don't necessarily want to get a jump and then be driving down the road and have that happen again. Like, I want to get this checked out. So I didn't quite know what to do first, but I figured, well, I can at least get a jump. I haven't noticed any other effects that would lead me to believe this is my alternator or anything serious like that. So the first person that comes out who was parked across from me, I waited until they came out, and it was this woman. It must just be weird for people to have a stranger ask them a question in today's world. I don't know. But I said, "Excuse me." And she just looked at me like, "Are you talking to me?" And I said, "Hey, would you mind giving me a jump?" And she kind of looked at me and gave me that body language and energy of, "Oh, I really don't want to do whatever you're going to ask me to do." She said, smartly, "Oh, I don't have jumper cables." And of course I responded, "Well, I have jumper cables. We can use those." And then she said, "Oh, well, I have to pick up my son from school. I really can't. I'm sorry." And I just said, "Oh, okay, I understand. You got somewhere to be. No worries. I'll wait for the next person that, comes out and is parked near me." And she goes, "Oh, well, you could go ask one of the employees in the store. I'm sure they have their car here. They would come out and do it for you." And I was like, "Yeah, that's not a terrible idea. Maybe I'll do that." And, she got in her car and left. So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what do I do now? And luckily, I have a AAA membership. And if you are in America and you drive a lot, probably not any better money than you can spend than having a AAA membership. It's really not that expensive, and it has bailed me out of so many situations. So AAA isn't sponsoring this, but I will say that I have used their service many times, and it has bailed me out of many crazy situations that I've found myself in. At one time, I was driving down the road, and, well, of course, where else would I be driving down? I don't know why. It's just funny we say these certain things. Oh, I was driving down the road. Well, what else would you be driving down? Anyway, I'm driving, and I get that same situation where you just know something terrible has gone wrong, and you're... or you know something terrible has happened, something bad has happened, and it's gone wrong. Whatever you're feeling, it's not right. And my car starts shaking, and I feel, oh man, that's a flat tire. And I pull over to the side of the road, and I go look at my tire, and it was so hot out when this happened. I mean, it was, 95 degrees middle of the summer. And the pavement was so hot that my rubber tire, in the time it took me to get off to the side of the road in a safe spot where I wouldn't, be in danger of getting T-boned, the rubber had melted into the rim of my tire to the point where I couldn't use the, wrench that I have in my trunk to loosen the nuts to even get the tire off of my car. Even if I wanted to change the tire myself, I couldn't do it. Like, I was totally screwed. There was nothing I could do other than get my car towed. Now, of course, I could have waited around, and eventually somebody would have been nice enough to stop and say, hey, do you need some help? Or I could have eventually, called a tow truck service and got my car towed, and but who knows how long that would have taken, or who knows how long that would have taken. Why can't I say that? Who knows how long that would have taken? What in the world? It's been a while since I've done this. Forgive me. So I called AAA, and he comes out with his professional tools, and he's able to get the tire off the car, put my spare on, and I'm able to drive it home. And then, later I took it to get a new tire. Anyway, that is irrelevant to this whole story. What was I even talking about? Oh, right. So I called AAA. That's why I was talking about it. I called AAA, and the guy comes out, and he tests my battery, and he has a kit where he can test all the other electronics in the car and everything else that's going on in the engine. He tells me, okay, your battery's at 0%, it's dead. But everything else is fine, your alternator's fine, so if I jump your car, you'll be able to get to where you need to go, and you can even go to an auto store and buy a battery if you want. Or, of course, he tried to sell me one on the spot, and I'm like, no, that's okay, I'll figure it out later. I just get the jump now and go home, and I'll figure it out after the fact. But this is where the story gets really interesting, because this was probably a 2 to 3 hour ordeal from the time that it happened until I finally got the jump, and then I was able to drive home. But it was just one of those things where 15 years ago, it would have totally ruined my day. I would have been stressed out, like, oh, why did this happen? So annoying. But now, with where I'm at and what I understand about reality and my place within it, I just kind of looked at this like, okay, let's see what comes out of this experience. Let's see how events unfold, and let's look at this as a chance to learn something as opposed to an assault against me, as if something is trying to ruin my experience. Which is how we tend to look at these things when we're caught up in, let's say, the mindset that we are accustomed to being in from an early age. That which has been ingrained within us. Our general worldview, how we perceive the world. Sure enough, I only had to wait a couple days until I found out what I would learn from this experience. And it happened when I went and saw my parents. We were, doing the thing you do when you first see your parents, small talk. Hey, how's it going? Good, blah, blah, blah. And out of nowhere, my mom says, hey, how's your car battery doing? Your dad and I were talking about it when we were driving the other day. We said, I wonder if Steve checks his car and gets his oil changed and stuff like that. And I wonder how his battery is doing. Just out of nowhere, she says this to me. And I said, well, what made you think of that? And they said, oh, I don't know. We just started talking about you and your car because it's old. And we just wondered how it was doing. And your battery came up for some reason because, that's just one of the things you think about. And I started laughing out loud. And I said, oh my gosh, I got to tell you guys this. And I went over the whole story about what had happened to me and how my battery died. And my parents didn't know how to process this. They just looked at me and they were like, wait, what? What is happening? And I had to compose myself and think, okay, how do I approach this? What do I say? And there's a great lesson here in how we communicate with people, especially when we're communicating things about reality that the majority of people aren't aware of. There were a number of ways that I could have approached this, right? I could have been blunt and just came right out with what might be the truth of the situation. And many people perceive this type of bluntness as being honest or truthful. And technically, when you're blunt, you are telling the truth or telling it like it is, right? Like you'll come across people who think that telling it like it is like empowering. and I mean, that's kind of true. Of course, there's context to every situation. There's no general rule to these things. But you got to ask yourself, well, hold on a second. What if I was being blunt and I thought I was being truthful, but I actually didn't know what I was talking about, but I didn't know that? Well, now you're just being mean, and not only being mean, but misguiding someone at the same time, like you're being a jerk. So you want to be careful about this idea of bluntness and honesty and, empowerment. Communication and social intelligence is more important than anything else in those sorts of situations. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but maybe an example will help explain what I mean. I could have turned to my parents and said, well, yeah, we're all psychically communicating with each other. There's this whole communication system that exists outside of your own mind that we are unaware of, that we are indeed trained to tune out. That's what mind control is. It's tuning out that communication system. So you are totally reliant on the mainstream of consciousness programming to form your very existence, to form your belief system, what you view as reality and what you think is possible. And bigger than that, because of this communication system, many of your thoughts are not even your own. Your mind is being interfaced with in real time with intelligences that are not your own, right? If I said that to them, I would be being blunt. I would be being honest. But to my earlier point, number one, that would fry their minds. They would instantly look at me as if I was insane. And those are the types of things you say to people where they would want to commit you to a mental institution, right? Because they're going off the mainstream programming. And when you say these kinds of things, that's what a schizophrenic says, or something along those lines, right? So that's not the best approach. When you're dealing with somebody who isn't aware on any level whatsoever. And two, also to my earlier point, that's my current potential perception of what is happening. I can't prove that with any sort of objective evidence that a normal person would accept. It's something you just have to experience many, many times to prove it to yourself. But at the same time, it's possible that that's not the truth. That's not really what's going on here. And so if that's the case, then you see how I would compound the less than ideal outcomes of this situation if I communicated bluntly and honestly about what I believe the truth to be, to the point where I could damage our relationship and then also be misguiding them at the same time, right? So this is my point. Social intelligence is more important than the objective truth in these types of situations. This is how you communicate with somebody who isn't aware. I was thinking the other day, it should be called the communication movement instead of the truth movement, right? Because if we started calling it the communication movement, then the other side, those who are opposed to this type of information becoming more prevalent in the collective mind, well, they call the truth movement truthers. They would have to call the communication movement communicators. And it would be a lot more difficult to paint communicators as domestic terrorists, is my point. So I think it should start being called the communication movement. Because that's what it is, right? That's what we're talking about. That is the real truth that we're getting at here. That esoteric, etheric portal that connects you to that which created you. That is the communication movement, right? We're trying to remind people that that's there. In the same way that I had to be reminded that it was there. I didn't know about this until someone pointed it out to me, right? That is what this is all about. That's what waking up is. Now, sure, there's all kinds of other information that you acquire along the way that's very useful and helpful, but it can also misguide you, right? Because there are all kinds of people pretending to be about what I'm speaking here, and they intentionally put disinformation in there to misguide you. And you always have to be on the lookout for that, of course. But you see, calling it the communication movement also impacts those people, the intentional deceivers, because they communicate the quote-unquote truth in a way that is designed to rile you up, get you agitated, get you in a state of disorder, right? Because that is what they use to synthesize order out of chaos. I mean, they tell you. And all of a sudden, if the focus is on how you communicate, well, that whole agenda falls apart. If you have to be held responsible for your language and the energy that you are putting out there towards anyone, a regular person, or those who are currently serving this agenda, who are ostensibly in control, well, if you are held responsible for that, now your tone has to change. And now your role as a divisive piece on the chessboard is called into question, and you're not as effective as you were in the past as a deceiver. So, wow, I really got distracted there from my story. But that is what goes on in your mind, and this all is going on in my mind in real time, instantaneously, right? That's part of the problem with communication with somebody who isn't aware. I mean, there is so much information, right? And I've been doing this for so long that there is no way that I can download everything that I know and have experienced and come to understand into the mind of someone who is not aware. It's impossible for me to do that, right? I can't transfer that into someone else. So I would be hindering the process of healing if I tried to spew all of that information and projectile vomit it. Sorry to put that image in your mind, but that's kind of what this is, right? All of this information that is masquerading as important truth that you kind of spew at people when you're in the initial stages, right? And you have this superiority complex because that's what's been programmed into you, because you haven't had any sort of awakening yet, any real awakening to what's really going on. You've just changed the information stream. It's just the new spin on it. Oh, yes, well, this is what's happening, but it's just a new world order plot. Right? But you're still in the same mindset. Nothing has changed about your being internally that transmutes anything that's attached to the information in any direction. The way you communicate and the state of your being transmutes all of that. If you are aware on this level, right? But there's so much information that's going through your mind, you can't force it on someone. They won't understand. There's no way. They have to go through that themselves. The only thing you can do is subtly influence their mind that might lead them to go down that path themselves. And so this is what I did when my parents and I had this exchange. I could have spewed all of that information at them, and I could have done it with this accusatory tone, like, oh my gosh, you guys don't know anything. Okay, boomer, right? Like the people who spread that kind of meme to try to get this generational warfare going on where, oh, the boomers are so dumb, they don't know anything. Well, if you were a boomer, you'd be dumb too, genius, okay? Like, if you grew up in the time that they grew up and you experienced what they experienced, you'd be just like them, even though you like to think you wouldn't. Be. Okay? That's the arrogance that's programmed into everyone's mind. They didn't have the information that we had. They didn't have computers like we had. They didn't have the access to the information. And like I said, I had to be reminded of this information, and if I didn't have access to the internet where I found it, I never would have been aware of any of this, and I wouldn't be talking to you right now. Everyone plays their role in reminding the collective mind what's going on here and where we are and what's happening. But anyway, I looked at my mom and dad, and with social intelligence and awareness of the situation, I said, oh my gosh, you guys are never going to believe this. My battery died on Saturday. And I was stuck in a parking lot for 3 hours. I had to call AAA. And I just got a new battery in my car. It's funny how you guys just randomly started thinking about my car. And they went on to be amazed by the fact that it was on the same day that this was happening. So I continued and said, oh, it's funny, right? How you guys were thinking about that at the very same time almost that it was happening to me. It's almost like you guys could sense that something was going on with me, and somehow it came through because we have this special son-parent connection, right? That's a deeper connection than most people have with each other, right? Just strangers or friends or whatever. That's like a genetic bloodline bond, and a bond that you form for 18 years or more with your family, growing up. So it's deeper than most bonds, and so you would expect there to be more residual communication possible when you're connected to somebody like that. And I said, yeah, Mom, just as a mother, right? You've heard other people say that they have this mother's intuition. They couldn't fall asleep one night. They could sense something was going on. They didn't know what. And then sure enough, the next morning they get the call that their son is in jail or something like that, something happened and they could just sense it. And so that is how I described it to my mom and dad. I just kind of put it in those terms that anybody could understand. And I could tell that they were really turning the wheels in their mind like, wow, this is interesting. I've never thought of things like this. That is true, right? We must be communicating on some level that's beyond being in someone's physical presence and speaking language at them. Oh, one other thing before I go that I wanted to talk about also is something that relates to our perception of time. I've done many recordings and videos on this. They're older, but back then when I was talking about this subject, I was sort of equating it with our perception of the color of the sun and how that may or may not have changed, and maybe how, as a part of a larger cosmic cycle, our perception of time was no longer syncing up in the way that it had been with mechanical time, which is artificial seconds, minutes, hours, etc. And there might be an element of that at work that could be happening on some level too and be contributing to what I'm talking about here. But I also think that technology is playing probably a bigger role in our perception of time and why so many people are feeling that it has changed. And how it no longer fits with those seconds, minutes, and hours. And we feel like so much has happened in a shorter amount of time to the point where a year doesn't feel like a year anymore. We look up and we say, the year's over already? Wow, that's crazy. And I have to say, if you see this topic being discussed on the internet, you will invariably come across the person or the bot or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's a misguided person who just doesn't know, or maybe it's this agenda putting this in here so people don't think more deeply about these things. But invariably, someone will say, oh, that's just because you're getting older. Oh, yeah, I mean, a year for you now is nothing compared to what a year is for a 6-year-old. I mean, that's a huge chunk of your life when you're 6. So as you get older and those years are less rare relative to your experience, it feels like they go faster. No, that's not what we're talking about here, and that's not what this is. Although, sure, that's objectively true. But please, do us all a favor and spare us from that comment in these threads, okay? Yes, we know. We're talking about something much deeper, okay? I just had to get that off my chest real quick. And what I mean is, okay, I'm 38, and let's say 5 years above me and 5 years below me sort of experience the same thing, relatively speaking. And what I mean by that is we are the last generation that grew up without being connected to technology in the way that everyone is now connected to technology. We're the last group of people that grew up, I mean, until we were 16, 14, 15, whatever, without technology. And I say that, but it's kind of, I need to clarify that, yeah, I say technology and you think immediately, oh, a smartphone. Gosh, they even have me calling it a smartphone. Do you see how this programming works? Your cell phone, your phone in your hand, it's not smart. We're attributing personal, we're personifying these technological devices now. It is artificial intelligence, literally, right? But you think of that, and I think of that too, because that's what our current experience dictates. But I had video games, I had movies, I had television, and that is a form of technology that the generation before me didn't have. So you see, it's a steady progression. This is the idea of Videodrome, right? It's the creation of that new synapse structure in the neuroplastic brain that I've discussed in blog posts and other older videos too, where it's creating this new perception of reality, this new way to perceive your very existence, and it's being created in your mind, literally, right? The very structure of your brain is being altered. And it started out with the television, and then things got more immersive, right? Even my video games that I played growing up, a Sega Genesis, a Nintendo, a PlayStation, I mean, those were so much more advanced than, the generation prior that was playing Pong or, whatever the case may be. And then, our movies got more sophisticated and immersive as CGI technology started to come onto the scene when I started watching movies during my formative years in the late 80s and the early 90s. So, even my mind, though I can say that I'm from the last generation that wasn't connected to the internet, still I was being affected by it. My perception of reality, the very structure of my brain was changing. And in some ways that allowed me, my mind, to be in a space where I would more easily adopt and understand the computer and the internet. And that's why you have, okay, boomer memes, about technology, and why it's so much easier for me to understand a computer than it is for my parents or anyone in that generation. Because when I was in high school and college, we were even to the point where I was taking computer science classes. I was learning how to build a website when I was still young enough to really learn it. But now, to get to my point finally, we've reached the stage with the power of the technology. I'll just assume that this has never happened in the history on this planet before. Okay, I mean, who knows? How could I know that? But we are in a situation where the human mind, again, it's kind of strange calling it the human mind, most likely there was some genetic manipulation that implanted another processor, as it were, into this primate body, because we are so different than every other creature on this planet. It literally feels as if there is a foreign intelligence in this primate body that, has just dominated this planet in a way that's not natural to the ecosystem here. But all of that aside, just looking at it objectively without any of that external context, there's never been a time where the human mind has been exposed to this much information over and over and over again, repeatedly every day. The mind has never had to try and assimilate so much information. And what I'm getting at is, as a result of attempting to process all of this information that is ongoing, it's rapid. Every day something new is incorporated and you have to assimilate that. Every day you learn something new. It doesn't even have to be a current event. You learn something new about the past and then that's assimilated. It's just a constant stream of information. And the mind has never had to process this much information before. And so it's altering our perception of time. The same minutes, seconds, and hours that I experienced as a kid playing outside all summer long, and then coming inside and going to bed, or maybe, if I was lucky, watching a television show with my parents, because I didn't have a TV, right? That kind of stimulation wasn't in existence back then. But now we are all experiencing it to a point where it's affecting our perception of time. It's time dilation. there's so much more information being processed in the mind in such a short amount of time that the seconds, minutes, hours, days, years don't fit anymore because we're processing so much more information. And so I bring up something that happened last February, and you sit there and you say, that was last February? That was 4 or 5 months ago, 6 months ago, whatever it is? Wow, that feels like it was 2 years ago. Even something that happens a week ago is ancient history in internet terms. Everyone's moved on from whatever that it was that went viral for 24 hours. And so you see how the model is sort of like the 24-hour news cycle, how they used to do it on the television. It's just compressed and amplified with social media and Twitter especially, because that's where all the news breaks. And so you could see why someone would want you, or something would want you to say, oh yeah, I'm just getting older. That's why my perception of time is changing. No, they would want you to think that because they don't want you questioning the very nature of your own reality and existence and what is happening to your mind in real time. And this is something that not anyone really talks about as it relates to technology. I mean, they'll give it, even in the mainstream consensus, conventional wisdom, they'll say, yeah, I spend too much time on my phone. Yeah, I spend too much time on the internet. But, that's just like viewed as something they detach from for a weekend. And then they're right back into their, regularly scheduled activities without making any sort of larger change. And I'm not coming at you as if I've conquered this. I'm totally and hopelessly addicted to the internet like everyone else. But I have a different view of it. And it's like my addiction comes from trying to be aware of every angle possible so that I know what the agenda is. And I could spin that in my mind as if, oh, well, that is okay to do, because it ends up in a recording like this, where it might help all of us eventually see something that's happening that we need to address. But that's delusional, because it's changing me and I'm going along with it just like everyone else is, and I'm part of the problem. But I don't know what the answer is. I mean, what do you tell somebody? Well, just disconnect and don't use your phone or your computer anymore. Well, that's totally unrealistic, because you basically can't have a job now if you do that. I mean, among other things, they're trying to say you need to have jobs now. But trust me, I understand the general anxiety that is in the air about all this. But that's my whole point that I was getting at earlier with the communication thing. Just if you maintain the energy that I'm speaking about here, it's still very difficult to view the world in any other way than pure amazement and awe. It's just, even with all of this stuff going on, it's kind of like, okay, so what? So what? And I know that's hard to hear because you initially want to reject it. Like, oh yeah, easy for you to say. But yeah, I understand. It's easy to say, hard to accomplish in reality. And I'm not immune from that anxiety either. But part of the communication system is transmuting that energy, transmuting that anxiety. It's almost like when you have that flip switched and your awareness turns on, it's like an organic transmutation device, an energy transmutation device, your mind and body becomes. And things get thrown at it and put in, and that awareness that's connected to the larger mind just transmutes it immediately. Immediately is a relative term, within a reasonable amount of time when you eventually have the realization, though you can, of course, be affected in the short-term, real-time moments and get knocked off your rocker, for lack of a better term. I don't know why I just said that. It's just one of these language things that you just say, right? But whenever I do that, I know I'm rambling. So I just wanted to finish on that idea about how our perception of time changing is a direct correlation to our use of this technology. And you see, hopefully, how the warnings about transhumanism are centered more on the Skynet Internet of Things aspect and the digital biometric side, which of course the social credit score apparatus would eventually tie into, and then you have all of that encompassed on the chip that's in your body, right? I mean, that sure is a part of it, but that's a very slow thing that's going on in the background that's going to take a long time to get people to adopt. The greater concern is the present moment and how our very mind itself is being altered. And that's something that we aren't trained to recognize. And that's sort of the more pressing concern as it relates to transhumanism, or becoming something different than what a human being used to be. And you're experiencing it in real time as you're being exposed to this technology. Your mind is changing. Just look it up. The brain neuroplasticity. Just Google that. Or don't use Google, use something else, whatever the case may be. Look that up. The very brain synaptic structure is capable of changing, and it is changing in real time as you continue to be consumed by the screen, and it's altering your perception, literally, of your very existence within reality as perceived through your interrelationship with the element of time. Wild stuff, right? So I will leave it there. That was just one more thing before I close this bad boy down. just one more thing. In honor of my boomer parents. God bless you. Take it easy, guys. Later.